Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of that Anthro podcast. This week, we have special guest Dr. Danielle Kurin, a professor at UCSB and a trained bioarchaeologist, as well as a forensic anthropologist. Dr. Kurin was such a pleasure to have on the show, and this is definitely the longest episode we've had, but it is quality, and she's so fascinating. So stick around, buckle in, maybe get a cup of coffee or tea, and enjoy the interview with Dr. Kurin. Hi, Dr. Kurin. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Gabby. It's so great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for coming on today, especially it being summer, and I'm sure you have other things going on, and you've been such a help and inspiration to me, so I'm really excited for everyone else to hear how awesome you are, and oh, Daisy, come here.
Oh, how is Daisy?
She's good. She wanted to join, apparently.
Wonderful, wonderful. Canine companion
Yes.
is great. Excellent. I'm really happy to be here and talk a little bit about anthropology as it relates to UCSB and I guess more broadly. So thank you.
Yeah. So to start off, this is something that I don't even know. Where did you do your undergrad? And did you know going in what you wanted to major in, or did you kind of discover that in college?
Well, so I found a piece of writing I did in second grade where it says, I want to be like an archaeologist when I grow up to discover tombs and stuff. So, I mean, so I guess the seed was planted pretty early. I'm from Virginia, the Washington, D.C. metro area. And because there's a lot of kind of historic sites, as early as like sixth grade, I was able to go on like weekend archaeology, of ancient excavations at Civil War forts or old plantations. And that really got me kind of jazzed up about archaeology. When I was 16, I think my parents wanted to get rid of me. So they let me go down to Peru and work on an archaeological project. So, and I was the youngest one there by far, but it really cemented my passion to work in archaeology and work in the Americas. In fact, I had been trying to get on a project for a long time, but everyone said, you have to be in college. You can't do it when you're in high school and stuff. And there ended up being two projects I could go on, and one was in Peru and the other was in Belize. And at that time in my life, I was really scared of spiders and like the idea of tarantulas. And I figured that there'd be more in the jungles of Belize than in like the North Coast desert of Peru. And now I've been working there 21 years. So, so when I went to, I feel
like field work gets you over the fear of spiders pretty quickly. I know it did for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I enjoy having, colleagues in the field who enjoy excavating graves and burials, and who do not have arachnophobia, or at least as strong as I have. It's getting a little better, but so it was a kind of a formative experience, and in doing that, I decided that I do want to go to a college where I can study archaeology, anthropology, but also one that would that had a college that would kind of put me in the pipeline to a good graduate program. Because ultimately what I wanted to do was kind of research and teach and kind of just share the love and enthusiasm that I had for this topic with other people, especially other young people. And so I ended up going to Bryn Mawr College, which is a women's college outside of Philadelphia. And it has a long tradition of training women in anthropology. Some of the most famous and especially kind of trailblazing women in anthropology, archaeology came out of Bryn Mawr.
It sounds like it was a good place for you.
Yeah, it was. Well, it's funny. It was, it was empowering. It was great to be with the sisterhood. But at the same time, after 2 years in the nunnery, I'm joking, but in that environment, I said, well, this is kind of as far removed as I can get. Being in the mainline Philadelphia, it's kind of the farthest away I can be from, the dusty, dirty trenches of Peru. So, I took a year off school to kind of test my mettle as an anthropologist. And I didn't have a lot of great guidance. It's a small college. There's only 1,200 people, but and maybe like there might be 30 archaeology majors. So it's one of the biggest majors on campus. But Bryn Mawr is known for sending the most women to get their PhDs in anthropology. So that was a big reason I went there. But certainly, this kind of old ivy covered covered Gothic looking, Harry Potter-ish campus was certainly different than, the field locations where a lot of us ended up working. So yeah, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to test my mettle, and I had a map of like the Americas in my dorm room, and I had like a pair of darts, and I said, you know what, I gotta test my mettle. So I took a dart, and I said, wherever it's gonna land, I'm gonna move and live for a year. And so I threw the dart, and the closest biggest city was a city called Cochabamba, Bolivia. So I took a year off school and I moved down to Cochabamba, Bolivia. And
wow, I'm sitting here with my mouth like open right now. Wow.
I don't know. It was like hubris or folly, but there was kind of an alumni connection. Someone knew someone else, and I was able to get a job as a janitor in the local university museum. And as part of my job as a janitor, aside from like cleaning toilets and, mopping floors and stuff, was to clean the exhibits and like to clean the storage cases. And so, they were, one of the things that was there were all these mummies. And so, and as I'm cleaning them off the dust to get them, clean off the exhibition, Windex the exhibition mirrors, I kind of started to think, are these mummies male or female? What did they die of? And that really got me turned on to kind of bioarchaeology, which I didn't really even know was a discipline until I got to graduate school. So I definitely had a love for anthropology. I didn't have great mentorship. I had some great professors, Janet Monge and Melissa Murphy. Janet Monge is the keeper of the bones at UPenn. Melissa Murphy is now at the University of Wyoming, which has a great graduate program. And those were two professors that really encouraged and supported my work in, what eventually turned out to be kind of a bioarchaeology thesis. And then from there, part of being an archaeologist or an anthropologist, I think you have to have kind of a MacGyver-like ability or an ability to kind of innovate or be entrepreneurial, be creative. So when I decided that I was going to do a thesis project on these mummies that I had been cleaning, I looked in like the Bolivian yellow pages, and I found a guy with a portable X-ray machine, and he came to the museum and he X-rayed all these mummies, and the 26 of them, and that actually became the basis for my senior thesis project. And having done a senior thesis project, I think made me a more competitive candidate when applying to grad schools. So I applied to 6 grad schools, got into half of them, and I went to the one that gave me the most money. And
was that Vanderbilt?
That was Vanderbilt, okay. Yeah. And it was that at that stage, it's hard because for students who want to go into bioarchaeology or forensic anthropology, Vanderbilt is not necessarily the strongest school in the country for that. People say, well, maybe you go to University of Tennessee, Knoxville, right, where the body farm is, or Arizona State, where they have, the largest program in the country. But I was really interested in the idea that, and following kind of the idea or the mantra that to be a good bioarchaeologist, I had to be an excellent anthropologist. And Vanderbilt's program specifically looks, the entire faculty there is focused on the Americas, kind of south of the Rio Grande. So Mesoamerica, South America, Amazonia, as well as the Andes. So I really wanted to become proficient in that area and become a specialist in that area, that huge area of the world. And and I really enjoyed my time at graduate school, but I worked under Tiffany Tung. I was in that program for about, 7 years. So kind of the standard for a PhD program.
Well, that's wonderful. Having so much of that earlier time being on the East Coast, all your undergraduate and graduate experience, how was the transition to the West Coast? You mentioned, the archaeology here is so different. It's a lot of native populations, whereas what you were saying a lot on the East Coast, it's like colonial farms or whatever. Yeah. So how was that transition? Did you notice any distinct differences?
Yeah, it's so funny. Well, first of all, I think the kind of the identity politics and the kind of rules and regulations about doing archaeology on the West Coast versus the East Coast, certainly there are differences. And that's really because, the indigenous populations were subject to, centuries of kind of displacement and genocide, which is why you have groups from, who originally from the American Southeast now in Oklahoma or in the West and stuff. So there's at least the NAGPRA rules, the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act as it stood, I think is certainly a more sensitive topic in California, and I would say the ancient Southwest. And that sometimes presents a challenge because certainly we want to respect our native groups, and their native groups that, for good reason, do not want depictions of human remains. They don't want people touching them, studying them, and that is absolutely within their right. We have to think of ourselves like, I kind of try to think of every grave that I excavate as if this were a family member or a grandparent. How would I treat that person? So it's not just about kind of throwing bones into a bag. It's really, again, about recreating human life, reconstructing kind of the lives of people, without history, people who did not have a writing system to tell us what went on. So, in terms of East Coast, West Coast, the main thing I guess I noticed was like a California drawl, like in California. So, hey, Professor Kurin. But that's.
I've also noticed that UCSB doesn't like to have classes on Fridays because everyone wants to be at the beach.
Yeah, that's also been very different to me too. Yeah, I've noticed that California has kind of two seasons, which is like beautiful and fire. So
yeah,
it's and to have California is just such a big state. It's that my senses, and you probably know this better. I imagine there's probably intra-cultural differences within California. My sense is like, at least from what I gather, is like Northern California is Southern California. And
yes.
So
that's always a thing when you're meeting people. I feel like, are you NorCal or SoCal?
Yeah. It was really an honor for me to start working at Santa Barbara, precisely because it had for 30 years been the home of Dr. Philip Walker, who is really one of the founders of bioarchaeology. Again, the bioarchaeology is essentially the study of human remains in usually prehistoric, but now more historic contexts. So it's really kind of a body-focused approach on the past. Archaeologists can look at, stone tools, they can look at pottery, or they can concentrate on human bodies. And so it was really a thrill for me to be in kind of a sacred space where the discipline really began. And
UCSB has such a strong tradition in bioarchaeology.
It certainly does. When you start to see, who are those professors, and where, a good way for an undergraduate to learn about a graduate program is to go where go to the academic home of the author of articles that you enjoy reading. Yeah. And, you start to look at that, and especially in bioarchaeology of the New World, certainly UC Santa Barbara has been kind of the eternal spring. And really there is such a long and strong tradition. So yeah, I think even now, like one of the things I'm most proud of or content about is when I got to UCSB, Professor Walker had passed away several years earlier, in his office and his papers. No one had really touched them in about five years at that point. So working with his widow, we were able to take his papers and get them accepted into the National Anthropology Archives at the Smithsonian.
That's wonderful.
So, yeah, it's really lovely because, in his earlier, during his graduate studies, he was really a Renaissance man, really like a polymath. He had done work under Dahlberg at Chicago, working on kind of dental anthropology. He had done work, he had taken, did a lot of work on primates and dentition and stuff, but really just broadened out. And I really respect the teaching philosophy or the pedagogy that he really established, which is kind of, in my sense, the way I interpret it is, again, that like a bioarchaeologist, you have a kind of a skill set, but you can apply that to anywhere in the world. I like to tell people, bones haven't changed much in 25,000 years, especially in the last, 8 to 10,000 years. So we're seeing something where the same kind of physiological or biological or chemical or molecular processes that we experience in our bodies today are things that people experienced, again, hundreds, thousands, and in some cases tens of thousands of years ago, if not longer in the past.
Yeah, and it's such a broad field. There's so much to explore within every bones. I could do this entire podcast literally just on people researching bones, but there's just so much to be learned, and in so many different things. Like I always think about how I don't know if you know Weston McCool, but he's a graduate student. Yeah, I hope to have on the podcast.
He's a doctor now.
He is.
Yeah,
yes, Dr. Weston McCool. Oh my gosh. And I had the lovely pleasure of having him at an Osteo B, and he didn't have a background in skeletal remains, and he just had this question about warfare and how trauma is. And so I think it's so interesting.
What is the perspective we take, and what is our unit of analysis? Yeah. And when I say kind of unit of analysis, what I'm talking about is like, what is the thing that we are going to focus on and either qualify or quantify in some ways. So I had Wes team. When did he come? Like 2013. He is definitely he picked up osteology very quickly. So it's no surprise that he went from acing the course to teaching it in a couple of years. So, and I expect the same for you, Gabby. So no pressure there. But it's I think bioarchaeology, forensic anthropology is one of those fields where, if you really, just like anything, you really kind of instantiate that knowledge. If you can explain it clearly, if you can explain something clearly to someone else, then you probably have a handle on it. And it works for anthropology, but my sense it probably works for chemistry, and it probably works for engineering and other stuff too. So our ability, I think, especially in anthropology, to be good communicators, oral, written, is really important, and more so now than ever, given that there's a cacophony of voices out there, and certainly or distinct understandings of the world and the people in it. And I think anthropology has a lot to offer in terms of making meaning of that kind of the cacophony of the human experience.
I agree. What do you wish you would have known when you started the field, and what advice would you give to someone who wants to pursue a career in a similar field, like myself?
Yeah. So again, I think one of the it's important to have a thick skin. A lot of what we do is kind of grant writing or article writing, which usually undergoes peer review, and some of those reviews can be kind of tough. So certainly academia has its own challenges, but I think the ability to have a thick skin, but also persevere is important. To be entrepreneurial. I think one of the differences, I think, as I've gotten older and grayer is, I used to think kind of as that classes and work in the field provided a chance for me to be kind of an academic boot camp,
Yeah.
where it's, it can be tough. And I think in the intervening years since I was 16, I think one of the things that I've really learned is to have compassion. And that's really important because there's always going to be kind of obstacles, and whether you're in the field or in the classroom, and to be able to understand that, and understand that everyone has a basic humanity is certainly an important characteristic. In terms of advice to give someone, in terms of pursuing a career in bioarchaeology or forensic anthropology, okay, my advice is that you have to go to the best school for what you want to do, that also gives you the most money. So there have been recent academic studies, but they've done studies about where, especially as women, who ends up with tenure track teaching jobs, by and large, a lot of, it's like, the overwhelming majority of those folks come from like a dozen graduate programs. So, when I went to Vanderbilt, I said, all right, maybe I'm not in the strongest, we don't have a forensic anthropology program there. So it's definitely not the, selling myself as a forensic anthropologist. There's a lot of competition, and there's certainly people with more experience than I do. But if they were I was kind of, I took the calculus that I could, as a bioarchaeologist and one who was doing her own field work rather than just looking at museum collections, I could kind of sell myself as an archaeologist, a bioarchaeologist, and a forensic anthropologist, but also a specialist in Latin America. And so I think, I also think it's important to go to, maybe this is my bias as a Boasian, but it's really I'd encourage people to go to schools where they have the opportunity to take a four-field approach. That is anthropology programs that aren't too boutique-ish, that still allow you to learn cultural anthropology, linguistic anthropology, physical biological anthropology, and cultural anthropology, and applied anthropology too. And I think that well-roundedness is extremely helpful. It's helpful for the student, I think, or the practitioner, to better understand, again, the world that they are immersed in. But it also, I think, makes you kind of a Swiss Army knife on the job market. So I think, look for for grad programs, it's also much different than undergrad programs. Undergrad programs are kind of like where you live, where you get a scholarship, U.S. News and World Report rankings.
Yeah.
And like grad school is really about the person. So, you when you study with, when you go to a graduate program, you're essentially kind of, it's a medieval practice. I mean, it literally dates to medieval times. It's kind of like a system of patronage. So you have your advisor and it's kind of, there's a series of rites of passage that you have to go through to go from, the novice to the professor. And those rites of passage are your oral exams or your comprehensive exams, your proposal, and eventually writing the dissertation. And so, you have to take, so you want to learn, you want to go to a school that has a tradition of placing students. That means their students are getting jobs. So you always want to ask when you're looking at schools, where do your students go after they graduate here? How long does it take to finish? There's a big difference when it takes, 6 years versus 10 to 12. You also want to ask if students are publishing, and if so, where? What kind of grants are people getting? National Science Foundation, American Association of University Women, Warner Gren. Those are important questions to ask. The opportunities for teaching are also key. Again, you can, there's been a lot of anthro graduates who have become science teachers in high schools and kind of preparing that next generation. So the ability to even to practice teaching, especially as a grad student, is really important. And so, and those are all important, I think, questions to ask when you look at graduate schools, because as much as you're being assessed by that program, you are also assessing that program. And graduate school lasts longer than most marriages, right? I mean, I think, what is it? The average American marriage is 3 to 5 years. And if you get out with a PhD in that time, that's amazing. So you're really dealing with a long time commitment with a program. And that also means you want to have at least 2 or 3 people on the faculty that you could imagine working with, because, it does happen where professors move, they die, they end up at a different institution, and that can leave the student feeling or they can retire. Mm-hmm. And that can leave the student feeling somewhat abandoned. Because there is that close, I think, generally tends to be that close relationship. I think it's between professor and student. I think it's also important to know, to get a sense of how many people your prospective advisor is advising. So if they have 2 or 3 students, that actually means they can give you time, and time is precious, right? The time to read your drafts, to have kind of brainstorming sessions. If the professor you want to work with has 11, 12 students, it's going to be very hard for you to kind of fight for a chunk of time where you can have kind of meaningful, kind of pure learning experience. And so those are the questions that I would ask. In terms of the other advice too, one of the things that I was never good at, I'm getting better now, is work-life balance. And, one of the things I think my biggest regrets in grad school is a lot of times, our summers are when we can do our excavations.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've never gone to, I had all my sisterhood, all my friends at Bryn Mawr, all my college friends, and, life went on for them. They had got married, they had kids, and I got invited to those things, but I was never present. I was always in the field, and part of me feels bad, certainly kind of feels bad about that, at the time, I think it was, I want to get done, I want to get ambitious, weddings always happen in July, and I got to be in the field in July. but it's only now again that I'm going gray that like I cherish those moments that I have with old friends, and those important, and being there for them in the important moments of their life, in the lives of their families. And so, as hard as it is, it's a very fine line to walk, because it's again, graduate school, about 50% in anthropology, 50% of people who begin a program won't finish. So that's already half. And then again, an exceedingly small number of those people are going to find, come out of the gate with stable employment. And so, on the one hand, you have to be very disciplined, good with time management, self-directed. But, I remember like my first year at UCSB, like I was working all the time, and to such an extent that like I would like fall asleep on the couch in my office. Oh. And like, and they'd like find, the custodial staff would be like, find me and stuff. And, and part of that, is kind of the work of a new professor trying to build a record and get work out. But also, I don't think in the long run that plan would have been, it's probably like, that probably is not the best plan. It probably gives you like, it's like a short track to a heart attack. So I think it's having hobbies and having a life outside of academia is important. When I was in grad school, I waitressed at an Indian restaurant pretty much the whole time I was in Nashville. They had barbecue chicken tikka masala, but whatever, right? So, but that, just even that, just bussing tables, got a little, I got a little walking around money, but it also exposed me to something that was totally non-academic. And more recently, I've developed interest in like pottery, like on the wheel and stuff.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah, it's just to get some, you always need to find some zen and centering and kind of grounding, because school is stressful and it's only gotten worse, so it's not easy.
I think that was really, really wonderful, well-rounded advice that you gave. And I know that it's been really helpful to me. I think transparency in the process of academia and just making sure that students have the resources they need to be able to be as successful as they can be. Like you said, just knowing the right questions to ask. So thank you so much for giving me your 2 cents on that. I think it's really, really valuable information.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So something that you brought up is your work and involvement with forensic anthropology. Mm-hmm. So for some of our listeners, including some of my own family members who still don't quite understand what the role of a forensic anthropologist in a criminal investigation is, could you kind of shed some light on that, as well as talk to us about some of your own involvement in forensic work?
Sure. So while bioarchaeology is the study of human remains in prehistoric or historic context, forensic anthropology is an applied science. So it's the study of human remains in usually a contemporary forensic, that means criminal or legal or context. So in bioarchaeology, we're studying the human, we're studying people's teeth to see what they ate. A forensic anthropologist will study the teeth of a skull to look for their dental records and actually put a kind of a social security number, like an identifier on that person. So the idea with forensic anthropology really is to get the kind of the profile of that individual, and also, when possible, consult with the coroner or medical examiner on the potential manners and causes of death. So those kind of that manner and cause of death is really is something that only the coroner can do for legal reasons. But, most doctors deal with living people, and even pathologists, they deal with people who are let's be frank, they're juicy, Yeah. And so you'd be surprised about how many kind of pathologists, coroners, medical examiners seek the advice of forensic anthropologists when they're dealing with just skeletonized remains, because
it's a very different skill set.
Yeah, it certainly is. And it requires, looking at the hard tissue, the bone and the teeth itself, with, I think, certainly a greater precision than the coroner would. The coroner is busy measuring the weight of the internal organs. They're, doing toxicology scans of urine or body fluids. Whereas the forensic anthropologist is taking again, on almost any case, unidentified remains and trying to put an identification on them. And so, now, unlike Bones or CSI or any of the gazillion shows that have come out, there really isn't a need for a forensic anthropologist in every town. Mm-hmm. In the cases that I've been involved in, they kind of range from like Ventura, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo counties. So if someone finds human remains there, they tend to call me. Forensic anthropology is really competitive, and there aren't as many jobs as one would think based on kind of the TV shows. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean you can't play a meaningful role. Even as an archaeologist, again, a lot of the tools that forensic anthropologists use, if you're excavating a mass grave or you're looking for a clandestine grave, mm-hmm. you need those archaeological skills to be able to excavate and identify where people are buried. It would be beneficial to have a good knowledge of biogeochemistry and isotopes. So you can say, all right, well, we can take the molecular content of these bones, dissolve it into a soup, and get a sense of where people's water sources, where the people actually came from based on what they ate and the water they drank. So it really is kind of true that you are what you eat, plus or minus a few parts per million. Those are some of the tools that forensic anthropologists use. And in the context, 9 out of 10 times that I'm called by police or the California Department of Law, California Department of Law Enforcement stuff, is 9 out of 10 times it's an animal bone. In cases where there have been human remains, and a lot of times they'll be like, some professor or something will move, some old doctor will move out of his house, and the new people moving in will find like a skeleton, literally a skeleton in the closet. So, so the idea is, is that, was that part of this doctor's like anatomical class, or, is this some kind of, seedy, secret? My understanding is that in Santa Barbara County, there are 26 unsolved cold cases that involve, I think, skeletal remains. So there's
well, that just piques all of my interest.
Yeah.
It shouldn't, but
no.
It does.
No, I mean,
I know experts have tried to solve them, but in my mind, I'm like, I can be like Bones.
Totally. Well, that's the thing too. I mean, I frequently consult with UCLA School of Law, and their idea of what kind of forensics and what you can learn from bones is from TV, and they're lawyers. They're lawyers who are going to defend people in cases where forensics end up being important, or prosecute them. And so it's the last time I was at UCLA, I was doing kind of a master class, and they we were the course had actually looked at a Netflix documentary called Making a Murderer, which features in where forensic anthropology, the study of human remains and skeletal remains, is a key aspect of what ends up, I think, being kind of a sketchy, potentially wrongful conviction. And
just so our listeners know, she has like a 20-page document. It's probably more than that. That you created with, was it one of your family members, to explain why the evidence was maybe not so great?
Yeah, so it's funny. Sometimes I tag team. My sister is a civil rights attorney, and she works in a public interest law firm in Pittsburgh right now, but she really deals with prisoners' rights. That's what she's done for the past 10 years. So just basic rights of prisoners, being able to get medicine. She's working on COVID stuff, and working on cases of wrongful conviction and really just advocating for basic human rights for people in jails. That is, people who have not been convicted of crimes. Their only crime is, their crime is being brown or black. Their crime is being poor. But that is not, not being able to pay your parking tickets should not be a death sentence.
No.
And so sometimes I need help with legal stuff and or kind of an understanding of that, and she'll sometimes ask me for to work as a consulting forensic anthropologist on some of her cases. So yeah. So with this, and if anyone is interested, there's certainly tons of documentaries that feature forensic anthropology. This Making a Murder one was particularly interesting because the bones, again, made such a difference. And when I did my master class, the UCLA law students were they were saying, like, really, how much can you actually tell from a bone? Like, if a bone is, if it's burnt, like, what does it matter? Like, is it really, what can you tell? And they're thinking, I think in their heads, just like anybody would, it's like, well, like, let me put a piece of chicken on a barbecue and like see what happens, So
yeah.
And in terms of, I think the newest and kind of most provocative, but also compelling use of forensics now is the forensic genealogy. So I've actually had students that are now starting to get into anthro majors who are going into forensic genealogy or as genealogical consultants. And that's really changed the field. The idea of DNA.
I was going to ask, that's like trying to find people based on like familial DNA, right?
Yeah. And that also, again, there's certainly, I'm sure you can imagine there have been DNA has sometimes technology comes ahead of law. So what do you do when you have a John Doe who has a DNA profile that is unique in the world, but you actually don't have that, you don't have that person's name or social security number.
You don't have anything to compare it to.
Exactly. And so also the idea of people who maybe 10 years ago took an Ancestry.com test and now find their DNA as part of a part of a public database. It begs the question, how can this, we've seen how it can be used for good, Golden State Killer and stuff.
Yes.
But, there's certainly privacy issues. And I don't know. I personally wouldn't take a DNA test. Like I think I value my privacy, my genetic privacy too, especially again because the law hasn't come up. And I don't know, I don't want to like paint a portrait of a dystopian future, but DNA is important, but it's not a panacea. So one of the big kind of new things you may hear on TV or kind of Dateline or 48 Hour, whatever these crime shows, is the idea of like touch DNA, where we are so good now. You don't need a whole vial of someone's blood to discern their DNA. You need a couple of skin cells, epithelial cells, right? The problem is that, for example, the forensic human biology forensic kind of program at University of Indiana, I think it was them, they showed, for example, that touch DNA could move from a victim to to the ambulance they went in, and then the next person kind of in that ambulance would pick up that touch DNA and go somewhere else.
So, well, I mean, that makes sense because we shed epithelial cells. But...
Right. Yeah. And the question is, we shed them. How easy are they to be picked up? So when we say, all right, well, this individual's touch DNA was found on the knife, maybe it was, but it could be that, someone touched someone else who then touched that knife. If you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's still stuff we have to work out, but certainly the amount of DNA or the amount of kind of molecular stuff we need to identify people is much less.
And less time processing.
Yep,
as well.
and much cheaper. So I think, especially for people who are up and coming forensic anthropologists, I would say as much as you take your anatomy and dissection courses, you should definitely focus on kind of this emerging kind of forensic genetics. I think it's a rising field, and in the next 10 years, there's going to be a lot of demand for it, especially, again, as health insurance companies are going to say, well, can we identify whether you're going to have, if your DNA says you have a predilection towards, getting a heart attack or something, do we have to insure you? And these are things that lawyers and ethicists are working on. But at the end of the day, someone actually has to be able to, to process that goo, and so for anyone going into forensic anthropology, I would certainly strongly consider programs that have kind of a genetic program or genetic contingent or paleogenomic or genomic contingent. So it's pretty wild.
How is your involvement in forensics? And I don't know, have you directly testified in a criminal case for a forensic case? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, okay. I haven't. So I usually don't do trials, but I do work kind of as a consulting forensic anthropologist. So I'll consult either with, and I'm an equal opportunity offender in that sense. So I'll work with the prosecution side as well as the defense side.
Yeah.
And the idea is that, the idea is really, data and facts, and what that then means to either party in an adjudicative process is beyond me.
Yeah.
Right?
I was just curious if it has kind of affected your perception on just the kind of criminal system in general and the justice system and how evidence is processed and everything, because I can imagine being around that so much, it would kind of give you a different perspective than someone who's never been involved in things like that.
Yeah, I think, you bring up a great point. I think one of the big misconceptions is, and this probably drives doctors crazy, lawyers crazy, anyone where there's a TV show about it, because it kind of gives you the idea that problems can be solved in 40 minutes plus commercials. So, and really there's a lot more uncertainty than that. We can't, there's not some secret computer that suddenly, creates a 3D hologram of someone or something, we see. It's really kind of actually going back to reference textbooks and taking measurements and samples and doing, looking for particular, identifying features, implants, dental modifications, fillings, braces. Yeah. If they had someone with a broken nose, someone with a withered arm, whatever, we're looking kind of for personal identifying characteristics. So in terms of kind of in terms of the criminal justice system, what I've seen is the at least in courts, but also in consulting, the deference that is paid to the forensic scientist needs to be counterbalanced with a reasonable degree of like scientific skepticism. So, for example, bite mark analysis, which has sent people to death, has been proven kind of bunk. In terms of a kind of a junk science, the same way that like cell phone tower data has been shown to not be a great, let's say our ideas of there's a lot less certainty. So, there are times when there are skeletons, and given the features, I can't tell if they're a man or a woman. That's where DNA would come in and stuff. So I think it's important, one, to realize what forensics can tell us, but also what it can't tell us.
Where there's still room for the field to grow, which is what I always think about.
Yep, you're totally right. So it's certainly, especially hearing, you hear about cases of wrongful incarceration based on like junk science or like shady witness, expert witness testimony. And if anything, it reminds me that the stakes are much higher. For bioarchaeology, certainly there's a community contingent, there's a social aspect, both with the living and the dead. But, when you're dealing with forensics, you're dealing with people's lives. When I teach like human osteology, I'm like most professors in this country, I'm pretty rigorous in terms of the level of detail and the precision that that students are able to identify bones. And that's only because I imagine our alums one day on the stand as an expert witness. And, in that case, well, what did you see? What did you find? It makes a big difference if, to be able to accurately identify, small pieces of bone, or to identify trauma versus, and other factors like that. So, yeah, I think, certainly there's,
did you do the bone in a box exercise with your students? Yeah, we did that too. That
bone in a box was something that my professor in college did. It was bone in a box, bone in a bag. She gave us like pig parietals though, so she.
Oh my gosh!
I know, but that's the idea. It's really also our osteology is a tactile science, right? You really need to be able to hold and palpate things.
Yes.
So I'm certainly concerned about how I'm going to teach it coming this fall term, given that we're all teaching remotely.
We're going to make it work.
Totally. No, it's going to be great. I'm just going to send every student a half a skeleton wherever they live. And so, and with the hope that we'll be able to deal with fragmentary and smaller and non-human remains, in coming months afterwards.
Yeah. So. And I think that, first of all, I said this to Dr. Holly too. Thank you for all of the hard work that teachers have been putting into, keeping the classes still as academically rigorous. And, I feel like as students, our education is very important to us, especially at a top public university. And that transition to online was scary for all of us. So I just want to say thank you.
It goes both ways. I mean, it's hard to stare at like 40 small gray, small black screens. So it really is your engagement and the engagement of your peers that make any class worthwhile. And that's true remote or real life. I mean, certainly there's a performative aspect of being a professor. And so that has to be, just like anything has to kind of has become modified in this environment. But again, the fact that Gabby, you and others have been able to just adapt to the circumstances and even thrive is a testament to your own resilience and your own creativity and I think your own integrity. And one of the best pieces of advice I heard was a professor I really respect, Tom Dillahay, who's at Vanderbilt, and I was deciding whether to go there, and he looked at me and he kind of Texas, genteel Texas accent, and he said, "Danielle," he says, "the most important thing you need, to have a long career is your integrity." And I think that's still true. So you want to be true to yourself and true to the stakeholders who depend on you, whether it is a Native community, whether it's the police department, or whether it's a classroom of students. But that integrity, that grit and resilience are key factors, I think, to that kind of prevent you from going over to the dark side,
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Keep you as kind of a rigorous scientist. So yeah.
Well, where can our listeners find more of your work? We didn't really get into it, but that's okay. I think everything else we talked about was so fascinating. But some of your own, your personal research.
Yeah.
Like, I know you're working on a book.
Yeah. Yeah. My Body of Disaster. Yeah. That should be coming out in 2021. It's a book that looks at, this was inspired and also aided by you, Gabby, and other students who put together fantastic case studies of what happens to human bodies in disasters, both natural and social. And so there's a couple dozen key kind of vignettes that talk about how human bodies have been or are impacted by disease, but also, by circumstance. So, but if you have insomnia, you can find my work on, you can find a cure for that by, I have published papers on ResearchGate, and I'm always happy to talk with interested students or researchers. Indeed, the reason I teach at a university, the reason I got my PhD was to be able to have the honor, the privilege of teaching students at the college and university level, and it really is a deep source of pride and something that I don't take lightly.
Well, I definitely think that you do a wonderful job of that, and I would encourage our listeners that maybe students to, talk to you or consider taking some of your classes if anthropology is something they're interested in. And yeah. No, it's good stuff. Yeah, I think so. Oh, I know. Last piece of advice. If you're going to be if you're going to be an anthropologist in a foreign country, learn the language of that country. If you're going to be working with indigenous people, learn the language of those indigenous people. I cannot tell you the difference like speaking Quechua, the indigenous language in Peru, has made in terms of, I think, the questions I can ask of my research and just in terms of community relations. I agree.
So yeah, that's another thing.
Yeah, when I was in Spain on my field school, I was so confident in my Spanish, not even remembering that in that part of the world closer to Barcelona, they speak a lot of Catalan.
Oh, right.
And I do not speak a word of Catalan, and it's a beautiful language, but when you hear them talking, I'm like, wow, that sounds like Spanish, but it is not Spanish at all.
Did you find yourself, though? Because I find, I've taken classes in Quechua and I failed them, but I can speak it fine.
And could not pick up a single word of
it.
No. I was in a taxi with a taxi driver who we were really struggling to communicate.
Oh man.
And I did it. My Spanish and his Catalan overlapped enough that we could do it, but it was interesting.
That's your brain goes into survival mode. So, I have no doubt that if you were to do, 6 months or a year there on a Fulbright or something, you would definitely be bin gutsing or
definitely
as much as you would anything else. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm very excited to release this episode. And next week, we're going to have one of the people who you were mentioning did a wonderful case study, Noah Hayes, is going to come on, talk about his case study. So there's more to come.
Fantastic.
Yeah, well, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And Gabby, thank you for doing this this service to our community at UCSB and also the wider community of anthropologists.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing you hopefully in person sooner rather than later. But until then, please accept a socially distant, a strong socially distant handshake.
Yes.
And yeah, have a great one.